Hey, good morning, Grace Pasadena. It's Pastor John Stone with our Tuesday morning devotion. It's really good to be with you today and look forward to being with you on Sunday. We're going to be looking at giving or tithing as it's called in the Bible this Sunday. And just want to start before we jump in to say this sermon was planned. I planned to do this when I first received a call from your church to do it. I think that people can feel shame about money. We'll talk about that in the sermon. You should not feel shame about money. Sometimes we're ashamed to talk about money in church. Like church is about people's spiritual condition, and that's right. And we want to see people born again. And the power of the church is prayer, not its money. But money ought to be talked about. And I'm not talking about this because suddenly the church is in a financial crisis. Your giving remains sort of historically at where it's been. We'll actually give a financial update after the sermon on Sunday so that you have some idea of how the finances work at Grace Pasadena and why they matter, because in the United States, if you have a church, money matters. But it's not from that place. This comes from a place of knowing this. When I look in your checkbook and when you look in my checkbook, you see my heart. Where my money goes, it reveals where my heart is. And the question is my money going to the kingdom of God or is it going to me? And let me read a couple passages and we'll jump in and look forward to a fuller explanation on Sunday. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, Jesus swears, where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart is also. You see, Jesus says where your money goes, we see your heart. He also says in Luke 6, give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured in your lap. With the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. So a few things that we'll see this coming Sunday. First of all, I want you to see that that we're commanded to give to God in the Old Testament and the New Testament together. It's well established, about 2,300 different verses in the Bible about money. But there was a clear call in the Old Testament and the New Testament to tithe. And it says, for instance, in Malachi, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. And there were 3 tithes required of Israel, one that maintained the temple and took care of the Levites, the pastors, the priests who served there, one that came in through the festivals where they threw these big parties and celebrated God's goodness to them, and then one for the poor. And so there was this clear command in the Old Testament and understanding that you tithe, that you gave money to what we would call the church, what they would call Israel. It was about 23% of their money. Normally the tithe is considered 10%. That's really laid out clearly, but that's really well established in both the Testaments. But as you move into the New Testament, what I want you to see, and we read some verses here, is that what Christians should be known for is generosity and giving. That we should really, when people look at us, they should say, look how generous they are. And the New Testament teaches us that from a place of understanding grace, we give. From a place of understanding grace, we give. Well, why? Because in grace, Jesus gave himself to us. It even says about his incarnation, his leaving the side of the Father to come down and take on flesh and to live and to die for us and in our place, that even though he was rich, he became poor for us. And so that exchange that Jesus did for us becomes a model for us, that we exchange our lives for others, and not just our families, but our neighbors and even strangers, and especially our enemies, that we exchange our lives, all of our lives, our energy, our time, our understanding, our money for others, and that what comes out of a Christian's heart is joyous, generous giving to others, but especially giving to the church, right? That we give to maintain the kingdom of God. Grace says, look, we want the kingdom of God to expand, and to expand, the church has to be healthy. It has to pay staff. It has to pay for electrical bills. It has to rent a place. And your session is doing a good job of navigating your budget, right? But all of these things are there, and it calls on us to give. And I really want to challenge you to think about your giving. I want to challenge you to look at your checkbook and see where your heart is. And I want to say some things, because I don't know you well enough. Marissa and I certainly love Grace Pasadena, but giving to yourself is not giving to Jesus. Giving to your children is not giving to Jesus. Giving that the New Testament and Old Testament expect, are you giving for the maintenance and the building of the kingdom. Of course, you give to your children, you love them. Of course, you pay for their education because you love them, however you pay for it. That's not the giving that's talked about here. There's an expectation that we would give generously from the heart. Let me leave you with this thought. Especially since COVID, churches have struggled a bit financially. Christians have been generous in the U.S. But two things. Number one, the average tithe reported by the IRS is 3%. People give about 3%, and really generally a little bit less. That's not all going to the churches. That's just their giving. But secondly, I'd like you to consider this. We don't talk about this a lot, but if there was a revival in the U.S. and God got hold of our hearts, churches would have to have meetings and have to decide, what are we going to do with the money? If your church tithe, I imagine your budget would be $2 or $3 million. And somebody will say, John, you're shaming us. I'm not trying to shame you. This isn't about Grace Pasadena or John Stone. This is about you and Jesus. And the question is, where is your heart? And I would encourage you this week and this coming Sunday to look in your checkbook and see. Good to be with you this morning. See you on Sunday.